an assignment. I was going to say a phone call, you know, the hotline, Kit Carson, to go rescue a white woman who had been stolen or abducted by American Indians somewhere on the Santa Fe Trail. Almost all these books involve Kit Carson saving the day, rescuing a damsel in distress, and you know, returning her to her husband or to her father. But in this case, real events sort of mirrored the Blood and Thunder plotline, because he did get the hotline phone call to go rescue a woman in 1849. And this name seems like out of central casting. Her name was Ann White, and she and her husband and their party on the Santa Fe Trail were attacked by Jicarilla Apache Indians, and all the men in the party were killed. She and her baby daughter and their servant from Missouri were kidnapped. And Carson gets the assignment to go track her down and try to find her and rescue her. And so I pick up here where, at the point where Carson goes to the place out on the Santa Fe Trail, not too far from here, probably about an hour's drive to the east, surveys the wreckage and, you know, looks at the scene and tries to figure out, well, which way did they ride? Carson studied the scene closely and gazed out over the endless plains, looking for anything that might tell him which way the Jicarilla Apaches had ridden. There was a narrative on the ground if one had the knack for seeing it. By looking for faint patterns imprinted on the land, by studying the individual blades of grass, by analyzing the dung of the horses he was following, an expert tracker could tease out a story from the most fragmentary of facts. It was early November. The skies were iron gray and touched with the cold breath of winter. The signs were almost impossible to read. Carson said that it was the most difficult trail that he'd ever followed. Not only were the tracks several weeks old, but they had been further obscured by a light snowstorm. Several times he and his men came close to losing the trail and abandoning the chase. But one day they came upon the residue of a Jicarilla encampment. And Carson took heart. Lying in the prairie grass was an article of woman's clothing. Several days later they passed the next former Jicarilla camp. And again, Carson found a woman's garment. He began to think that Ann White had deliberately left a trail of her belongings, like so many crumbs for her rescuers to follow. Carson followed the trail eastward for 12 days, pushing almost to the border of Texas. They passed into the first suggestions of the staked plains, a prickly expanse of mesquite, yucca, and cholla cactus. Then Carson spotted fires smoking on the horizon. It was the encampment of several hundred Jicarilla Apaches under the leadership of a well-known chief named White Wolf, set along the banks of the Canadian River near Tucumcari Butte. So what happens next is there's a little disagreement between Carson and this Army Dragoon that he's with about how to approach the camp. And Carson wants to attack, and this Dragoon wants to approach in a posture of negotiation. And they're talking about this, trying to figure out what to do, and one of the scouts of the camp spots them and alerts the camp, and the camp scatters in all directions, and they lose Carson loses the element of surprise. So Carson and his men come down to the camp, look around at what's left of it, and so I pick up there. But then Carson spotted something. About 200 yards from the campsite, a figure was sprawled on the hard-baked plain. The men rode over to inspect and found to their dismay that it was the corpse of an American woman. Ann White had been shot through the heart with a single arrow. She was perfectly warm, Carson said in his dictated memoirs, and had not been killed more than 5 minutes. So Carson and his men bury her in the prairie and have a little ceremony for her, and then they begin rummaging around the contents of the camp, what was left, And one of the soldiers at that point discovered a book that the White family had evidently brought with them from Missouri. A paperback novel starring none other than Kit Carson. Almost certainly it was the first Blood and Thunder, entitled Kit Carson, the Prince of the Gold Hunters. I went to the Library of Congress and found this book and read it, and like I say, I would dare you to read it. It was not good at all. It was, well, it said that it was based on true facts. One of those true facts was that Kit Carson had single-handedly discovered all the gold in California, which is why he was called the Prince of the Gold Hunters. Carson could not read the book, of course, but later, perhaps over the campfire, one of the soldiers regaled him with passages from the story. This is one of the lines from the book that I particularly liked. Kit Carson, his lip, that proud, that determined lip, was compressed with the firmness of a rock between his clenched teeth as he held his devoted hand within the flame, scorching it to the very bone. This was the first time that Kit Carson had come in contact with his own myth. The book was the first of its kind that I had ever seen, he said, in which I was made a great hero, slaying Indians by the hundred. At first he was vaguely amused by this colorful novel, but then he began to think of Anne White. He imagined her reading it while enduring her captivity. In this story, it was by an author named Charles Averill, Kit Carson finds the kidnapped girl and saves the day. But in this instance, the real Kit Carson had failed to avert a disaster. He feared that Averill's fiction may have given Anne White a false hope. Knowing that I lived near, Carson said, I've often thought that as Mrs. White read the book, she prayed for my appearance and that she would be saved. Neither Anne White's daughter nor her servant were ever found. The White murder would haunt Kit Carson for the rest of his life, and he would continue to be troubled by the implications of his growing celebrity. He insisted that everything in Charles Averill's Blood and Thunder was a lie. Later, when a friend offered him a copy of his own, Carson said, "Burn the damn thing." So, that's really the beginning of the myth of Kit Carson, and the rest of the book is really about sort of how myth and reality come in constant conflict with each other. And